Hey everyone, Sleepy Reader here. This is part 11 of the comic book community's group review of the Watchmen. So if you haven't already watched the others, I'm putting a link to the playlist down below. Everyone else has done fantastic jobs. Each person has their own style. They've all come up with interesting insights and approaches to the chapters that they covered. And I'm one of the new guys. I've just been doing YouTube videos for a little more than a month, and they invited me to join in, getting some fresh blood in with the old fogies. So it's a bit intimidating. It's my Saturday night, so I'm having a beer. Lagunitas IPA. I recommend it highly. So at this point, the last two chapters of Watchmen are pretty much the finale of the story together. I think together they make a finale, sort of part one and part two of the end of the story. So if you haven't read Watchmen yet, I would not watch this video. I would wait. I would read Watchmen at least once before you watch this video, unless you totally don't care about having the sort of secret of the entire 12-issue graphic novel ruined, because this will ruin it. And I think I'd like to say that I consider I come from the point of view that this is one of the greatest works of comic book art ever, and you know, in terms of what I like, one of the best books or creations ever. I mean, it's just there's other things that I love, but it's definitely one of them. And I believe that Alan Moore is a genius. He could have this work alone would be proof for that, but he's done a lot of other brilliant work. I think he's proved himself many, many times. And Dave Gibbons, the artist, is a incredibly good comic book artist, and this is probably his very best work. I think he worked well with the genius of Alan Moore, that they were very collaborative on this book, and they bounced ideas. He could match Alan Moore's genius and bounce back ideas at him, and that made this an even richer, more fantastic work. That said, this issues 11 and then issue 12 are my least favorite sections of the book. I think in part it's because they are the end, and the end is never satisfying as the journey, particularly in a kind of in a science fiction story, a mystery story. It's the setup, the world building, the creation of characters that's really fascinating, and there's something a little of a letdown compared to that in just the mechanics of the plot coming to an end. Also, in this case, things are literally coming to an end in many ways, and that's just not very fulfilling, even though there may be important messages and all of that Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons want to give us. And for its time, the coloring was also pretty radically different from what people were used to in comic books. John Higgins, I believe, was the colorist. Higgins. They don't have credits at the beginning of the book. At the end, yeah, John Higgins. And I understand that John Higgins worked quite closely with Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons also, particularly with Dave Gibbons. And he was a friend of Dave Gibbons that Gibbons brought in on the project. So starting with the cover, as usual, it's one of those enigmatic, however you say that word, covers to the Watchmen. We see this shape that I kind of interpret as the shape of a bug, but I'm not sure if that's what we're supposed to be seeing. And then when you look closer, within the shape are flowers and a butterfly and some greenery, some water, some drops are dripping over it. So somehow it seems sort of beautiful and sad at the same time. And when we open up the comic book, we slowly are revealed. First we see a whiteness, and then we see that shape again, and we pull away, the shape's tiny, and we slowly see that what we're looking at is this sort of giant globe-like greenhouse with snow blowing over it. And where we are is we're in the Arctic Circle. Like Superman with his Fortress of Solitude, Adrian Veidt has a kind of mansion, super headquarters in the middle of the Arctic waste. And he's so rich he can afford a giant greenhouse out there. And hovering over it, over the opening scenes, is this monologue, which slowly we see is being delivered by Adrian Veidt as he looks at this huge panel of TV screens. I should back up here. I'm gonna tackle the book strand by strand. So there's 3 basic plot strands. The biggest one is Adrian Veidt giving us his backstory, his life story, and confronting Nighthawk and Rorschach, and revealing to them what everything has been about and how everything was done. And then another strand is the pirate comic book that we've been reading along throughout most of the issues, called The Black Freighter, I believe. And there's a boy, I guess an African-American boy, who's been reading the comic book throughout this entire comic book. And he's been sitting on the corner, leaning against one of these electric car rechargers next to the newsstand. He's been reading the comic book for free, the newsstand owner letting him do it, and chatting with him while he reads the comic book. And so we get views of the world going on around them on the block in New York City where this newsstand is. And in the old days in New York City, that's where you got comic books, at these newsstands that seem to be on almost every corner of Manhattan, or at least on the big streets. So back to Adrian Veidt. He, in the opening, is talking about the cut-up method of William Burroughs, who was I think he's dead, but he was a major figure in sort of avant-garde American writing from the 50s on, kind of an iconic fellow. And one of the famous things he did was he would write a story or a novel and then cut it up into lots of pieces and just scatter the pieces and then glue them back together and see what happened. And Adrian Veidt talks about that, and he's comparing what he's doing to that, and I guess because of his looking at all the TV screens and taking in so much information, and he talks about an impending world of exotica glimpsed only peripherally. Perceptually, thus, simultaneous input engages me like kinetic equivalent of an abstract impressionist painting. Phosphor dot swirls juxtapose, meanings coalesce from semiotic chaos before reverting to incoherence. He's sort of telling us that he predicts the future by taking in so much cut up, disparate information, and he puts it all together. And then he soon compares that William Burroughs cut up technique to the shamanistic technique of cutting open a live animal and reading the entrails and reading the future from that. And that makes me think that Ozymandias is a pretty pretentious fellow. But at the same time, it also seems like Alan Moore's maybe talking a little bit about his own technique of storytelling, with so many different threads in the story that don't necessarily connect directly. And then we focus in on one of his screens. We're seeing Night Owl and Rorschach approaching, and we get some fun dialogue with Night Owl and Rorschach. But they still have a ways to go. And Veidt leaves his control room, and as we pull away, we see this painting that he has on his wall of It's hard to see here, but it's a painting, as we learn later, of Alexander the Great cutting the Gordian knot. So Veidt moves on to his vivarium, as he calls it, his greenhouse, and he's gathered together his 3 loyal servants, and he's serving them wine, and this is a great occasion, and he's explaining parts of his life to them. We get a flashback to his life that shows us that that he was a genius, but he hid his genius so that people would think he was a normal person when he was a boy. When his parents die at age 17, there's a picture of him at their grave. He sets off on an adventure across the world to follow the tracks of Alexander the Great. And as we're revealed more, as I now know so much more about Ozymandias than I did when I first read it, just looking at this picture, it's kind of odd. He's sitting on his parents' grave and he's chewing on a piece of grass thoughtfully. It almost makes me start thinking that he killed his parents. I don't know. There's no real evidence for that. But there's no evidence of him feeling sad or any emotion over the death of his parents. And I believe he says that he idolized Alexander, and that Alexander the Great was the only person, even though he's 2,000 years dead, the only person that he could relate to, that he felt was his equal. And so he tells more of his story about his travels and about how eventually he moved from Alexander the Great. He discusses the slicing of the Gordian knot, but he moved in his hero worship. He moved from Alexander the Great to Ramses II, who's also known as Ozymandias. So he named himself after that. And then he decided to be a superhero to try to solve the world's evils, through fighting the individual evils as a superhero. And then it turns out he has poisoned his loyal servants, and they are all dead. They've only heard a small part of his story. He's poisoned the wine they were drinking. And after that, he opens the doors of his vivarium and lets in the snow, destroying the beauty that he's created there and covering up the bodies of his servants in snow. And I'm skipping over the parts that aren't part of this thread for the moment. Then Night Owl and Rorschach enter through the now open vivarium, come into Ozymandias' lair, where he's calmly eating dinner after having killed his loyal servants, who we find out in the interview section at the back of the comic book that they are kind of like his best, most loyal friends because he's rescued them from Vietnam. And he casually, easily defeats both Night Owl and Rorschach. So he's the far superior superhero, or supervillain. And he further explains himself to Rorschach and Night Owl. So we get kind of a continuation of his story, and we learn how he could see into the future that superheroes were going to be banned by the government. And so he left and he amassed this wealth and he started a new plan for saving the world, for improving humanity. And we slowly learned that his plan was to he created this genetic clone of a genetically telepathic person and expanded its power greatly and made it look like an alien. And he also invested in this teleportation technology, which kills you upon teleportation, but otherwise works. And his plan is to, and here comes the ultimate spoiler, and we learn this in this issue. His plan is to teleport it into New York, and its telepathic death cry from its brain is going to kill half the people in New York, and it will look like an alien. And this will bring together, according to Veidt, the nations of Earth and avert nuclear disaster. And in this fabulous scene, Night Owl sort of sensibly says, you're a madman, and how could you possibly do this? It's just not something that could work, and we'll stop you. And Veidt says, what do you think? Am I an idiot from an old comic book, or as he says, an old Republic serial villain? Do you think I would explain my masterstroke if there remained the slightest chance of you affecting its outcome? I did it already 35 minutes ago. So, and there we see the clock showing New York City time. The same clock, I guess, that we've been following along. Although this clock also reminds you of, back during the Cold War, where people talked about it being 6 minutes to midnight, or 2 minutes to midnight, or 10 minutes to midnight being the end of the world when the bombs would all go off. So that's the main thread of the story, which makes this issue Veidt's character issue, where we learn about him. But he's a cool character. We also learn, we've already been learning a bit about how he's been killing off everyone, but we've learned the full extent of it, how he's just killed anyone who might possibly know and manipulated the lives of lots of people, including Dr. Manhattan, created cancer, caused cancer to the people near Dr. Manhattan, etc. Anyway, he's killed lots of people, and I start thinking of him as a serial killer, basically, a liberal serial killer. He's a liberal who wants to save the world, and a serial killer, and he's a genius who doesn't feel that anyone's his equal except for Ramses II and Alexander the Great. He's kind of Minutia Man talked about Dr. Manhattan being like a Nietzschean Übermensch, a Nietzschean Superman. He's kind of a Nietzschean Superman too. And one of my understandings of the idea of Nietzsche's idea of Superman is these were the superior people who should run the world, and for whom regular morality did not count because they were so superior. So Ozymandias seems like that kind of person. So I'll just quickly, I'm going on longer than I would have liked. Let me quickly say, then in the Black Freighter series, we're coming to the end. Our hero in the Black Freighter is just going around killing lots of people, and at the very end, he's swimming onto the Black Freighter and joining them. He's become enveloped by the darkness and accepted it. Let's see, where is it? The world I tried to save is lost beyond recall. A horror amongst horrors must I dwell. A rope snaked down, sputtering, I grabbed it, and from the decks above a cheer went up, both gross and black, its stench affronting heaven. The end. And I don't quite know what to make about the Black Freighter. Is the way it feels suddenly in this book is not only about doom and gloom and blackness, but is the character in the Black Freighter kind of like Ozymandias, trying to be a hero but embracing darkness. And then a more complex story is the story of what's going on the street where the newsstand is, where a bunch of characters pass through the same sort of nexus of the newsstand. A gay couple, a lesbian gay couple who are in conflict, and an African-American woman who's looking for her husband. And eventually we see her and him having an argument. She doesn't want him doing social work anymore or working with disadvantaged people. She wants him to stop sacrificing his life for others and come back and spend time with her family. And we have the owner of the newsstand himself, who's constantly saying prejudiced kinds of things about gay people or about black people, but he doesn't get it. He's like, hey, what? I'm just being friendly or whatever. and he and as that thread goes on, things are getting more and more violent on that block. The one of the lesbians, the more butch lesbian, is beating up her lover, and against his wife's wishes, the African American social worker is rushing in to help, and some police are coming in. So there's kind of this violent conflagration, or violent scene going on, and the owner of the newsstand tries to make more of a connection with this boy who's been sitting there reading his comic books for free. And he says, "So what's your name?" And it turns out they're both named Bernie. And he says, "What a coincidence that, we both have that name." And the boy says, so what? No big deal. There's lots of people named Bernie. It doesn't really signify anything. So that human connection seems to not be made. But then we get the big revelation that the events are already in play. The giant fake alien is being teleported to New York and is going to kill half the inhabitants of New York City. And all this action, all this sort of mounting violence and unpleasantness on this street comes to an end, and it's wiped out. But most interestingly, the two Bernies, the boy who's been reading the comic books and the newsstand owner, they come together and they embrace. And just before they're obliterated, the shape of them embracing turns into that shape there that we've seen from the front cover. And it seems very significant or moving that they're embracing at the end. And I have to say, at times I find Alan Moore's approach to be very cold and intellectual, and he seems superior to all his characters. And but then and all these regular humans all seem so caught up in their own unpleasantness that he has little sympathy for them. But then they embrace just before they're destroyed, just a human touch, and that seemed very powerful. And Alan Moore, as this kind of cold intellect, has become something I thought about a lot while reading this issue, and not an issue that I've reread as much as I have the earlier issues. So I hadn't analyzed it, thought about it as much previously to having to do this review. And I can't help but wonder, in the whole Watchmen story, where is Alan Moore? What is his beliefs? Because we have these very evil, or from my take of the way Moore presents them, very evil right-wing people, although then he presents a little bit of sympathy for them. And we have this liberal, Ozymandias, who believes he can make the world better by killing millions and millions of people. And he believes, and it seems that Alan Moore believes within the story, that the world really is doomed, which is a feeling that one did have stronger in the mid-'80s, when Ronald Reagan used to be making jokes about pressing the button, and the Soviet Union seemed like a mess, so who knows what they would do. And all of that kind of went away. That whole feeling went away after the whole Berlin Wall fell down and the collapse of the Soviet Union. So with hindsight, we can see that the world did not need something as radical as killing off, 8 or 9 million people or 7 million people or whatever it is, to create a new utopia and prevent nuclear war, because nuclear war did not happen. But does Alan Moore believe that this is the only way, even just within the context of the story? If Ozymandias didn't do this, was humanity doomed? So is Ozymandias the hero of the piece? He seems a lot like the ultimate Victor Von Doom to me, who has rationalized that everything he's doing is for the good of humanity. In a way, Alan Moore shows us how to really do the ultimate evil supervillain with Ozymandias. But then does Alan Moore actually think Ozymandias is the hero? Is Alan Moore like Ozymandias? Ozymandias is kind of the author of everything that's happened in this book. He's manipulated every event with, you know, a few details that perhaps he failed to manipulate correctly, but for the most part has controlled the events of the book and is smarter than everyone else. Does Alan Moore, who is, I think, a genius, feel he is smarter than everyone else and looks only can relate to someone like Alexander the Great or something like that? Where is Alan Moore in this? I don't really know, but it's kind of there is no moral ground to stand on in this book, it seems, unless you do stand with Ozymandias. And there is kind of another moral twist to things in the final chapter, which I won't go into. But from this book, from this chapter, it's really hard to find any kind of moral ground. I think Ozymandias was probably a serial killer, you know, from birth. But he was so idealistic, he didn't do any killing until he had his rationale for it. But I think he's secretly taking pleasure in wiping out everyone he's known and everyone who's befriended him and helped him so that he can change the world. And I personally don't believe the world will stay a utopia, or that that some other crisis won't come up that will threaten mankind. And do you have to every now and then just wipe out 5 or 10 million people to set the world aright? So it's a morally difficult book. And maybe Moore is reflecting that the whole idea of supervillains and good versus evil and stuff leads you down this path to this morally impossible situation. And also another thing is that a writer always is an evil mastermind, because you have to kill off your characters, you have to make them suffer, just as Ozymandias has to do that. So anyway, I think that covers everything. For me, the big thing is Ozymandias as this evil Nietzschean Superman, or is the Nietzschean Superman the only way to go? Does someone who's smarter than everyone else have to take over and fix things, no matter how brutally? We aren't really given what Ozymandias's plans for the future are. How will he recreate humanity into a utopia? Although it is implied that he's so much smarter than everyone else that maybe he can achieve something like that. I hope you guys have enjoyed this. Sorry for running on so long. Coming up very soon is the last episode, which will be done by Howlermouse, a great thinker about comic books. I shouldn't say that. I'm applying more pressure on him. But anyway, it's been a lot of fun watching what everyone's done with this. And thank you to everyone who invited me in. I think I will, reading and listening to everyone, I've had thoughts about more thoughts about Watchmen, and I've tried to just focus on this chapter here. So I will get back to you. I will have a few more thoughts. Okay. Cheers, everyone.